Well, good morning. How are y'all doing? Quiet as usual? Not good? Well, last week we talked about Leah. If you were here and you remember, we talked about Leah, and Leah's part of a family with Jacob. There's Jacob, Rachel, and Leah. Remember, Jacob worked for 7 years for Rachel, and then he got tricked into basically marrying Leah. And so we talked a little bit last week about Leah. Leah was not the favored daughter. She wasn't the favored sister or the favored wife in all of probably most of her life. But I want to talk about this morning one of the children of that family. So Jacob is married to Rachel and Leah. Leah ends up having more sons. In total, they have 13 kids. Leah has more sons than the other wife, but the other wife, Rachel, is again the favored wife. If you remember, there was a scripture that talked about Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah. Well, as she can be the favored wife, what do you think that means for the children that she has versus the children that Leah has? Those children are favored also, and the two sons that Rachel has are, the first one is Joseph, and the second one's Benjamin. And so Joseph is the favored son now among all these sons. When we pick up in the story, we're not going to go into all of Joseph's life today. We could do a whole series just on that. But Joseph is this favored son among all these sons. And just to give you a little more context too of like the importance of this family and where they play in the mix of the history of people who believe in God is, maybe you've heard of like the 12 tribes of Israel. We'll talk about like the 12 tribes of Israel. Right? Those 12 tribes came from these 12 sons. Jacob and Esau that we talked about 2 weeks ago, and Jacob was in the story a little bit last week. Jacob's name gets changed to Israel. And so he's the father of the Israelites, and their 12 sons, his 12 sons, become the 12 tribes. One, like I mentioned, Benjamin. One of the tribes is the tribe of Benjamin. One of the tribes, there's a son named Levi, is the tribe of Levi, and so on and so forth. But I want to talk this morning, and this is before there were tribes. You really don't see the extent of this family growth until you get into the next book of the Bible, which is Exodus. There's a big, probably 100-year gap between the end of Genesis and the beginning of Exodus, where the population of the Israelites has grown. And so I think in our text this morning, it also refers to them, or specifically refers to Jacob as a Hebrew. So you can kind of sort of take this word Hebrew and Israelite and kind of mash them together. We're basically, with a few nuances, but we're basically talking about the same people. If you're talking about a Hebrew person or you're talking about an Israelite person, for the most part, you're talking about the exact same people. And so Joseph is this favored son of Jacob, and we get all this in Genesis chapter 37. Most of people know about the story that Joseph was given this ornate robe, this coat of many colors. I think there's a Broadway musical, Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat or something like that. I've seen it a few times. It's a great show. But so this story is fairly well known in society in general. So that's the Joseph we're talking about. And Joseph also has this ability to interpret dreams. In his childhood, he's probably really like an older teenager or maybe in his 20-somethings, has these dreams that basically point to the fact that someday his family, his brothers, are going to bow down to him. And so he has these dreams, and he tells his family, he's not real wise at this point, he's probably still kind of young and doesn't realize, some things, yes, you know them, but maybe they're best, like kept to yourself, like maybe we just don't need to tell everybody about that. Well, he wasn't that wise, and so he goes and tells his brothers about, oh, I had these dreams, and in these dreams, all you guys were bowing down to me. And then it happened again. I had another dream that was sort of like that one, and all you guys were bowing down to me. I think it means one day you guys are going to bow down to me. Now, you can probably imagine, if you have any brothers or sisters or anybody else in your life, how you would feel if they came to you telling you this. You wouldn't be real thrilled. Well, neither were Joseph's brothers. They weren't real thrilled. As a matter of fact, which tend to happen kind of frequently here, people get so angry they want to kill people. And so his brothers basically decide they're so fed up with him being the favorite son, having these dreams, that we're going to bow down before you and all this kind of... They get so irritated with it, they're just going to kill him. Like, you know what, we're just going to kill him. And so they somehow they finagle, they work out this plan, they get him out there and they're going to kill him. But the oldest brother, Reuben, he wants to save him. He's like, you know what, guys, this really isn't a great idea, killing our brother. This isn't going to go over well with mom and dad. You know, they're probably going to be ticked off. We might get in trouble. Maybe we shouldn't kill him, right? And so he convinces them, why don't we throw him into this, basically like a dried up well. Why don't we throw him down in this well? Maybe Reuben's thinking, hey, we'll throw him down in the well. Everybody will calm down a little bit, like our senses will come back to us, and we'll start to think about, yeah, killing somebody is probably not a good idea. We'll throw him in the well for a little while. Maybe everything will work out. Well, while Reuben's gone doing who knows what, something else, this caravan of people headed from Canaan to Egypt is traveling by, and the other brothers, left on their own with no guidance from older brother Reuben, decide, well, you know what? He said we can't kill him. Why don't we sell him? Because then we can sell, if we kill him, then all we've got is a dead guy on our hands. If we sell him, now we've got some money and he's off our hands. So they decide to sell him to this caravan. They probably flag him down and say, hey, are you guys interested in a slave? And they said, well, sure, it depends on how much, and they come to some kind of agreement. They hand off Joseph to them. They divide up the money between themselves, and everybody's happy. Well, except for Joseph, probably. And so we're going to pick up there, a little bit after there. This caravan takes Joseph to Egypt. In Egypt, he's resold into slavery into this guy. His name is Potiphar. And Potiphar is the chief of the guard for basically the king of Egypt. The king of Egypt is called the Pharaoh. The chief guard is probably the guy that's in charge of the guards that maybe guard the palace or something like that. The elite of the elite guards, they're there to protect the king. And this guy Potiphar is in charge of all those guards, and that's the household that Joseph ends up going to work in. Okay, you with me so far? We all caught up here? So we're going to be in Genesis chapter 39, and it's a little bit of a long reading, so hang on with me here for a little bit. Genesis 39, and they'll be up on the screen, 6 through 20. So Joseph did well in Potiphar's house. His work ethic and things like that were really well, that he sort of basically got promoted. And here we are in verse 6. Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome, and after a while his master's wife took notice of Joseph, and she says, "Come to bed with me." But he refused. "With me in charge," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. And my master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then," he says, "could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even to be with her. He was just avoiding this whole thing. One day, he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the other household servants were inside. And she caught him by his cloak, and she said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. And when she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and run out of the house, she called out to her other household servants. She's like, "Come here, come here." She goes, "Look." She says, "Look to them." She says, "This Hebrew, he has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. And when he heard my scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. And so she kept his cloak beside her until the master came home. And then she basically tells him the same story. Skip down to verse 19. When his master heard the story, his wife, the story that his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me." When he heard this, he burned with anger, and Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. So not just the average, you were kind of a bad person, you've been speeding on your donkey too many times, and we're going to make you go to jail, right? Or maybe you were doing something else that is kind of sort of frowned. We're going to send you to maybe the city jail. You spend the night in jail. The next morning, when your senses have come to you, we'll let you go and whatever. No, this is like the prison where the king's people were, the people that king sent to prison. That's that prison. So this is like federal prison. This is like Leavenworth, Kansas, where you make big rocks into little rocks, right? You do something really bad, that's where they send you. Well, this is the kind of prison that Joseph is in. This morning I want to share a personal story with you that relates very well with this Joseph story, because there's a lot of things about this Joseph story that surprisingly, this is really surprising, that surprisingly relate to submarines. No, okay. Well, in the submarine, I gotta help you out here, right? Because you're like, well, what do submarines have to do with any of this? Well, first off, if you don't know, I was in the Navy. I'm retired Navy. I was in submarines the whole time I was in there, and the one personal attribute, the one trait that is valued in submarine service, and not just valued but required, the one trait that is required more than anything else, more than intelligence, more than stamina, more than brute strength, the one personal character trait that is not only highly valued, but is actually required in the submarine service is the trait of integrity. And the parallel used to teach this is watertight integrity. You got the steel tube, there's water all around, and the people who are living inside this tube, they want to keep all the water out, right? And so they want this tube to have watertight integrity. We don't want any water getting in. Well, if you, let me give you a little bit of kind of cool submarine ocean physics here, because at least I think it's cool, and talk about pressure. As pressure builds, as a submarine goes deeper and deeper and deeper underwater, pressure builds. Right? Many of y'all probably swam to the bottom of a deep end of a swimming pool at least once in your life, probably, right? That's probably about 10 or maybe 12 feet deep, right? And you feel that pressure pushing in on your ears and on your head, right? You kind of feel that pressure. Well, that's water pressure pushing in on you. Well, at the bottom of a swimming pool, the pressure that's being pushed on you is probably about 5 pounds per square inch. And if you know a square inch, a good size, this is round, but is about the size of a quarter. About the size of a quarter is about a square inch. So for every space the quarter can take up, each quarter individually has 5 pounds pushing on it. So if you took a quarter and you set something on top of it that weighed 5 pounds just on that quarter, that kind of pressure, that's 5 pounds per square inch. But we're talking about submarines here, and there's different kinds of submarines all over the world. I'm not going to go into detail, because if I told you something, if it was super secret, I'd have to kill you all, and I really don't want to do that. Ruben's already told us that killing people is not really a good idea, so we're not going to do that. So we'll just go with a general number like 1,000 feet. There's some submarines that can go to 1,000 feet, some that can't all over the world. So 1,000 feet. 1,000 feet underwater is the equivalent to like a 100-story building. Typically a story in a building is about 10 feet. So 100, picture, I don't know where there's any 100-story buildings around here. There's definitely not in this area, but a 100-story building, that's how far underwater we're talking about. So at 1,000 feet underwater, the pressure per square inch, about the size of a quarter, the pressure pushing in on that 1 inch of surface area is about 441 pounds. 441 pounds for every square inch on that hole is sea pressure pushing in, trying to kill everybody inside, is what it's trying to do. And so for a submariner, watertight integrity is super, super, super important. Because if we were to spring a leak at a depth like that, the water would come in so fast that the submarine probably would not be able to recover. Just like that, the thing would fill up. If you want to know a little physics about that, 441 pounds per square inch at 1,000 feet deep. If you were to pop a hole in the submarine that was 1 inch square, the water would leak in at a rate of about 25 liters per second. So 25 liters. We don't deal with liters too much, but most of us have probably been to the grocery store and bought a 2-liter bottle, right? 2-liter bottle of soda. All right, so a 2-liter bottle of soda, so if you take 25 divided by 2, you get 12 point something, so we'll just go with 12. So imagine that you've got 12, probably would take up about the top of this table if you had 12 2-liter bottles. Every second, that's how much water is coming into the boat. 1,000, 12 2-liter bottles. 2,000, now you've got 24 2-liter bottles. 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, you get all the way up to 10. And after 10 seconds, now you've got 720 2-liter bottles. That's probably more than what probably would fill up the stage. After a minute, that was a minute, it was 720. But as you can see, watertight integrity is very, very important to submarines. But personal integrity is also important because a submarine crew is small. In a submarine like the one on the screen, the crew in that submarine is probably about 120 people. Some of the modern ships are even getting smaller because of all the automation. So you got a crew of about 100 or 120 people, and all of them are trained in 2 different ways. One, they're trained in a specific job. Like I worked in the communications field, so I was trained in communication and electronics and antennas and things like that. So I was trained in communications, but also when you earn your warfare pin, most of us know about like airplanes, when you become a pilot, you earn your wings. On a submarine, when you become submarine qualified, you earn your dolphins. They kind of look like wings, but they're fish things like a dolphin. And to earn those, you have to prove that you have a basic knowledge of almost everything on the ship. You know how, we got a power plant out here. You know how the reactor works. You know how pressurized water systems work. You know how pressurized air systems work and other things like that. You also know how to fight a fire. Because if a fire breaks out on a submarine, it's not like you can call the local fire department and they'll come down and come put it out for you. The people who are on board have to do it. The same thing is true about flooding. If there's some kind of flooding, then those people have to be prepared to fight that. And so they're all trained to combat fires, combat flooding, and other kind of disasters. Everyone is counted on to do their job, and everyone is counted on to do the right thing. Because you probably know submarines are pretty complex, pretty complicated pieces of machinery. There's all kinds of valves and switches and knobs and things like that, and at the wrong place, turning the wrong valve the wrong direction could spell disaster for the entire crew. And so everyone's counted on to do the right thing. In 1994, I learned a very valuable lesson about personal integrity. I'd been in the Navy probably about 3.5 years, and my boat, submarines, we just called them boats, my boat was on a deployment. We were over in the Mediterranean. We'd been gone a few months already and still had several months to go. And we were gone in the Mediterranean, and we were in port at this time, and I was standing watch at midnight. We just called it the mid-watch. And I was inside the submarine. In my job, I had this clipboard, and my job was to walk around with this clipboard and check probably several hundred items every hour. My whole job was walking around the ship. It's the middle of the night. Almost everybody's asleep except for some security guards and a few other people and me walking around the ship. And I'm looking like in the bottom, you've got the bilge, and sometimes there'd be some water in there. And so you'd have to check it and make sure there's not too much water in there. There's a limit. If it's 4 inches deep, then you need to pump that water out of there. But you look at it, you measure it, you're like, okay, it's 2 inches, you're good. Right? You go over here and you check maybe the pressure in the air tanks and make sure it's at the right area. Check. You go over here, make sure the drinking water tanks had enough drinking water in it. Check. And you go around the ship and you check all kinds of things like these. But there was this one valve. This one valve that was in the overhead inside the chief's quarters. Now, that may not mean much to you either, but the chiefs in the Navy, and especially the chiefs on the submarines, these are the dads of the boat. they're like, well, sorry dads, I hope this doesn't all apply to you, but these are like kind of the rusty, crusty sailors, right? They've been around for a long time. They're kind of no nonsense, and they know everything because they've been doing submarine work for a long time. Well, this valve is inside the chief's quarters. And so I've got to go into the chief's quarters. It's like a little lounge area that has a couple of tables in there, and then go into their bunk room where they're sleeping to check this valve to make sure that it was in the right position. But the thing about this valve was, this valve, like many valves in the submarine, it's not one that you could just bump and accidentally switch the position. They had like a locking, a latch mechanism on them. So one, you'd have to really squeeze it and turn it. And two, this particular valve had a padlock on it. It had a padlock on it that was locked, and the key for that lock was kept in a safe in like the captain's stateroom or something. And this thing, and I looked at my clipboard from the watch who had been before me. It's check. It's midnight. We're in a foreign port. Everybody's asleep. This thing's got a padlock on it. The key's in the captain's stateroom. What are the chances that this valve is out of position? Almost none. Not to mention the fact that if it was out of position, there would be this loud rush of water coming into the submarine that would definitely wake everybody up, right? So, pretty sure that the valve's not shut or in the right position. And so, as I'm doing my watch, I kind of get there, that area, I'm like, you know what? I don't want to go in there, because sometimes these rusty, crusty old guys, all they do is bug us, right? I come in there, I'm trying to do my job, and they're teasing us, or they're asking us some question that we're supposed to know with their infinite submarine knowledge that I don't know, or something like that, and they're just getting on to me. It's like, hey, are you doing your job? Are you doing this? Are you doing that? I'm like, I just don't want to deal with that. So I'm just going to check it off, and I'm going to go on my merry little way, because I'm not really concerned about this particular valve. And so, during my 4-hour watch, I decide not to check this valve. And basically what I'm doing on this sheet is I check it off. I check it basically saying that I checked it when I really didn't. And this is where my integrity began to unravel. Because integrity is not so much about doing something or not doing something. Integrity is about doing the right thing. Integrity is about doing the right thing regardless of where you are, and regardless of who is watching. Even if no one is watching, even if you're all alone and no one would ever know, integrity matters. In Joseph's story, you could see how it might be difficult to maintain some integrity. He's in a different culture with a different value system. He comes from Canaan, from the Promised Land, the same place that Abraham went, and Abraham's son, and we talked about Jacob and Esau, and now Jacob's sons, all 12 of his sons, but Joseph in particular. And they're all believers in the one God, the creator of the universe and the sustainer of the world. That's who their faith is in. But now he's way far away. Life has gone really, really south. In many ways, he could be questioning whether or not God is really still with him. And he's living in a culture that doesn't believe in that God. And their standards are very different. And he's got this woman who keeps encouraging him to come to bed with her. You could see how it would be easier and easier as time went on for his integrity to collapse. But instead, he goes to jail rather than betray his integrity. Notice his response to Potiphar's wife in verse 9. It said, "How can I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" His opinion and the basis and the foundation for his integrity is not just his personal character, although that is probably a part of it, but he's like, how can I do this and sin against God? He considered if he succumbed to the temptations of his mistress, he would not only betray his master, but he would also betray God. And in many ways, Joseph's integrity and his faith are tied together. On the submarine, everything seemed fine that morning. I'm off watch now, and I'm sitting there eating breakfast. We're still in port. And the guy who has the watch after me, he comes over to my table and he goes, hey, Russell. We called everybody by our last names there. He goes, hey, Russell. He goes, the chief of the boat wants to see you. I thought, well, that's interesting. I wonder what he wants. So I thought nothing of it. So I'm like, okay. So I finish eating real quick, and I get up, and I go to the chief's quarters. Dun dun dun. Right. I go to the chief's quarters. I knock on the door. I open the door. I say, Petty Officer Russell, reporting is ordered. I'm looking for the chief of the boat. Of course, he's sitting right there. And again, another one to kind of get this idea here. I walk into the chief's quarters, and there is, we just call him the Cobb. Chief of the boat. We just call him Cobb, C-O-B for short. So there's the Cobb. And again, to put your mindset in, we kind of talked about the chief's quarters, but this is the master chief. This is the highest ranking enlisted guy on the ship. This is the guy that's probably been in the Navy longer than anyone else on this submarine, even longer than the captain. This guy eats, sleeps, and breathes submarining. Submarining is his life. And if anyone was rusty and crusty, this guy is the rustiest and crustiest of them all. All right, this guy is no nonsense. Submarining is serious business. And so there I am. I'm like, hey, Cobb, what's up? And he looks at me and he says, so, Russell, he goes, where were you at midnight and 1 a.m. and 2 a.m.? Of course, I'm like, well, I was on watch, standing the below decks roving watch. I was doing my thing with a clipboard, He goes, yeah, no, I mean, like, where were you? Like, there's this valve in here that you're supposed to check. And I couldn't sleep last night, so I was up doing some work, and I never saw you come through here. And in a moment of fear and panic, I chose to lie. I said, I don't know what you're talking about, Cobb. I came through here. I didn't see you. But I came through here and I checked that valve. There are many ups and downs in our lives. We have all, life's like a roller coaster. You better have your seatbelt on. You might get thrown out, right? Life's like a roller coaster. There's all these ups and downs. I mean, look at Joseph's life. He was brought up as his favorite child, given this special coat. I know that may not seem like a big deal to us, but when you maybe only owned one set of clothing, to be given another set was like being given a car or a house back then. And so he was given this coat that kind of set him apart. And so he got set apart, and so he's his favorite child, but then his brothers hate him, and they sell him into slavery, and he's down here in the dumps. But then he's at Potiphar's house, and at Potiphar's house, he works hard, and he's a person of integrity, but he's also a person of good work ethic, and his character begins to represent well, and Potiphar gives him more and more and more responsibility, and he's back up. And then what happens? Potiphar's wife gets eyes for him and decides to seduce him. And even in maintaining his integrity, he ends up back down in the dumps in prison. You find out later through his life that we're not going to go through, he ends up rising back up again. But when you're in the dumps, you don't know that's going to happen. When you're sitting in this well, this dried up well where your brothers are throwing you in because they really want to kill you, you're not really sure how things are going to work out. When you end up in prison, in the king's prison, because you did nothing wrong, you're not quite sure how things are going to work out. Joseph had integrity because Joseph trusted God. Again, his integrity and his faith worked hand in hand. And this whole story is really the defining moments for Joseph. Moment when he could have turned his back on God, but instead he chose to trust God and keep his integrity. See, he didn't trust success, the success he had in Potiphar's house. He didn't trust position, the position he had as a favorite son, or the position of being in charge of all of Potiphar's house. He didn't trust his own personal power, his ability to get things to work out the way he felt they should. Instead, he continued to put his faith and his trust in God. After my conversation with the Cobb, I was removed from all watchstanding duties. The next day, the ship headed out to sea, and the Cobb came up and told me, he says, you know what, you're relieved from all watchstanding duties. You can't stand, not just that watch. He's like, you can't stand any watch. The watch you're supposed to stand under way. So now my division is one man down, and they're having to rotate more often. Basically, they're going to have to work overtime because I'm not there. And through this time, it's personally, it's just kind of crippling that you've made this horrible mistake, and I'm no longer able to do basically it's like I got fired. If we were probably in port at like our home port in the United States, they might have kicked me off the submarine, maybe, I don't know. I've seen guys get kicked off the submarine for similar things. Because you get to this point where you're like, you know what, we can't trust this guy, so we can't have him on submarines. And so he says, you can't stand in any watches. And he tells me that that he's going to go and he's going to talk to the captain and see what they want to do. And I just feel humiliated. I'm like trapped in my own lies. I mean, one lie was that I checked off this thing on the list saying that I did something that I really didn't. And then when I was questioned about it, I lied again to cover it up. And I'm like trapped, and that's how lies work. They just kind of pile on each other and they trap us. And all I could think about was that I was in jeopardy of losing everything that I had worked for. I mean, I was a good sailor. I was a really good sailor. I mentioned before, I worked in the communications division. And I'm not trying to brag here, but I was like the go-to guy. If you needed something done in communications, and you really, it was kind of important, and you needed to make sure that it really, no kidding, got done, I was usually the person they came and talked to. I was the guy who got things done. And because of that, and because of my work ethic, I had advanced pretty quickly. And it wasn't like I was always this conniving, sly, sneak around, kind of do all this stuff so that I could advance quickly. No, I was kind of like a do well, do good, really honest, good person, doing the job the way the job is supposed to be done, and it showed. And it showed in that I advanced pretty quickly. I mean, my career was ticking along at a great rate. But the Cobb tells me he's going to talk to the captain, and they're going to figure out what they're going to do with me. And one of the things they could do with me, besides kicking me off the boat, is also reduce me in rank, which would set me back 3 to 5 years. I mean, it was a potential career-crippling mistake. And I think, he said he's going to talk to the captain, and it's like 3 long days ticked by. I think that he's letting me sweat it out. I didn't know this now, but I look back later and go, I think he was letting me sweat it out because it kind of worked. I mean, it did work. I mean, because I had nothing to do. Imagine yourself being locked in this room for weeks on end, days on end, and you have nothing to do. Just kind of walk around, and all you have to do is think about the horrible mistakes that you've made. And so I spent a lot of time in prayer. And a lot of time in prayer. And I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but I love how, as we spend time in prayer, sometimes we don't pray for the things that we really should pray for. And as we spend all this time like working on it or whatever, the Spirit of God is also working on us. And I've had this happen a couple times in my life where my prayers change. Like I'm praying for this and this. I'm telling God, get me out of this, man. Whatever you do, I'm here for you, man. I'll like go to church every Sunday if you just do this one thing, right? Or something else, right? We start making deals with God and things like that. And through all this, the Spirit's working on me and it's wearing on me. And I get to this point where my prayers change and I'm like, you know what, God? I have goofed up. I have messed up, and it's totally my fault. And so I am going to throw myself at the mercy of the command and whatever they do, but I know that I need to own up to this. So first of all, God, I'm owning it to you to tell you I've lied, and then I lied to cover it up. And that's not what I should do. And I'm also going to go and confess this to the command. And so 3 days of just sweating this out, I felt like Jonah in the belly of the great fish. Actually, very much I was like Jonah in the belly of the great fish. The name of our ship was the USS Sunfish. I mean, Sunfish is doesn't sound very tough, but the sunfish is this giant sea-going creature. It's really, really big. And here I am in the belly of this giant fish, thinking about what God would have me do, and what I'm trying to go do something different. And so it worked. So that about that third day, again, my prayers changed, and I decide, you know what, I'm done lying, I'm done running. I'm going to trust God no matter what happens. And my trust in God was not like, okay, I've come to terms with this, and so God's going to make sure that nothing bad happens to me when I own up to this. That's not what I was thinking. I was like, there was a very real possibility that I could be reduced in rank, that I could lose my job, that I could be kicked off submarines, but the right thing to do is to tell the truth. The right thing to do is to tell the truth. And so that's what I set out to do. See, in our lives, success and achievement are a lot like sea pressure. Success and achievement are a lot like sea pressure. That the more we invest, the more we advance in our lives, whether it's career advancement or social advancement or whatever, the more we advance, the more people look up to us or think highly of us or whatever that might be, the more and greater the pressure is to maintain that status or that position. The greater the pressure is to maintain or keep that status or position. Because like me, I had worked hard to be where I was, to get where I was, and I didn't want to lose any of that. And the higher we get, the further we have to fall. And the more likely we are, and this is important, depending on where you are in your life, if you feel like you're in a place where maybe you've done well, you've been blessed by God, and you've advanced, and you've achieved, and you've gotten accolades, or whatever it is in your life that you feel like you've done well, the pressure to hold on to that can cause us, if we're not careful, to do things like lie or cheat or whatever to make sure we don't lose everything that we've worked for, that we don't lose our position, that we don't lose our status, or that we don't lose our power, wherever that may be. And the problem really comes when we measure success by status, position, and power. That's really where the problem is. We look at success and go, oh, I have this position, I have this power, I have this status. That is success. But what if we measured success by maintaining our integrity regardless of what the situation was? What if we were committed to doing everything possible to make sure that we never lost our integrity, no matter how bad it got, no matter how much we had to lose, or even how much we had to gain, that we would not lose our integrity? Because when this life is over, all our material possessions, and I think we know this, all our material possessions, all our corporate advancements, all our social status, all of that stuff is going to be gone. But our character is what's going to matter. Will our faith be coupled with our integrity? At the end, the greatest success of Joseph is not so much his secular achievements, although they were great. Not only did he become in charge of Potiphar's house, but later he ends up becoming in charge of the entire Egyptian country, the entire Egyptian nation. There's Pharaoh the king, and then there's Joseph, second to him. That's what ends up happening through Joseph's life. But although his achievements were great, his single-mindedness to trust God and hold on to his integrity, no matter the consequences and no matter the situation, is how he is remembered. Joseph had integrity, and his integrity was connected to his faith. Later, when I went and spoke to the Cobb, so I've come to terms with it, 3 days in the belly of the fish and all this stuff, and I'm just like, a lot of prayer and a lot of spirit working on me, a lot of come to Jesus kind of moments. I go to the Cobb and I say, hey Cobb, can I talk to you? He goes, sure. And I hadn't talked to him. I'm like avoiding everybody. And we kind of go down the passageway to this little area where no one's hanging out. And I said, hey Cobb, listen. I said, I messed up. I messed up big time. I said, I didn't check the valve. I didn't check the valve the whole time that I was on watch. And not only that, when you asked me about it, I lied. I lied about it because I was scared, because I was afraid. And I told him, I said, I'm throwing myself at your mercy. And I understand the consequences can be severe, but right now I know that the right thing to do is to come clean and to tell the truth, because integrity matters more than anything else. And the Cobb looked at me, more like he kind of looked down on me because he was kind of a tall guy. And he looked down at me, he had this ball cap on, this USS Sunfish ball cap, and he kind of looks down at me, and the brim of his hat and his dark eyes and his gray hair and this kind of look of parental concern came over his face. I was like, whoa, are you all right, Cobb? I mean, usually you're like yelling at me. That's usually what's happening at this moment. And he kind of looks at me and he just says, hey, Russell, he goes, what have you learned? I said, well, I've learned a couple of things. I said, one is only I can throw away my integrity. No one can take it from me. Only I can throw it away. And the second is that lying will never solve or overcome my problems. Lying will never solve or overcome my problems. And so these lessons that I learned in my Navy career, early in my Navy career, and these lessons that I think we can take from the story of Joseph are this: that in your life, only you can throw away your integrity. No one can take your integrity from you. Situations can be bad, they can be terrible, they can be stressful, they can be whatever they can be. But only you can throw your integrity out the window. And two, that lying will never, ever, ever solve any of your problems or overcome any of your failures. We all have failures in life. We all have problems. And it's so, sometimes I find it so weird, even for myself. You know, we try to sweep that stuff under the rug. Like that's going to help. Sweeping that stuff under the rug, lying about it, it's never going to help. It's never going to solve our problems, and it's never going to help us overcome it. Thankfully, and I know it doesn't always turn out this way, but the Cobb looked at me and he says, well, the captain and I already decided 3 days ago what we were going to do with you. We were just waiting for you to figure out if you were going to come to terms with what you had done. And he says, because of your past performance, your past work ethic, and your past integrity, we're going to let you off with a warning. But he looked at me and his face changed again. He became that angry Cobb again. He goes, but don't ever, ever, ever throw your integrity away again for anything. I was like, aye, Cobb. Now, super thing. He says, so get back to work. So I go back up to the radio room and I'm like, hey, I'm here to stand watch. And they're like, can you? I'm like, yeah, they let me off with, And so they were all surprised and everyone was happy. But he says, never, ever throw your integrity away. Again, integrity is one of the few things that no one can take from you. You have full control over it. If you lose your integrity, it's because you chose to discard it. And if you keep your integrity, it's because you chose to keep it. And again, so my encouragement to you this morning is these things. Hold on to your integrity. Lying will never, never solve your problems or help you overcome difficulty in life. And so, in this series, Defining Moments, the subtitle is that, how will you be remembered? Will you be remembered at your place of work, at your home, where you volunteer, in this community, or wherever else? Will you be known and will you be remembered as a person of integrity? So that's my challenge for you for this week. Let's pray and we'll be done. Lord, I thank you for blessing us, and I thank you so much for your patience with us, that we do goof up. We do the silliest things sometimes, and as we advance and as we progress in life, we gain achievements and status and notoriety and position and power, and sometimes we forget that our integrity is way more valuable than all of those things. Status and position and power will always come and go, but our integrity is something that stays with us forever. And so we ask, Lord, that you help us, that you strengthen us, that your Spirit work in us like it worked on me. Hopefully, though, we'll come to our senses before we do something foolish. that we'll be known as people of great integrity, and that how we treat our fellow person will be a hallmark of how we're remembered in our lives, that we'll be seen as someone who is honest, who is ethical, and has integrity. We want to honor you with our lives, and so we pray that we will do so and that you will forgive us when we don't, and help us to be the people that help each other carry their burdens, because there's times in our lives when things just fall apart. Help us to throw ourselves at your mercy and the mercy of those around us. And if we're the person who someone is throwing themselves at, help us to be kind to them and help us to be patient. We want you to be our God. We want you to be the Lord of our lives, the director of our thoughts and our actions. We want to be your people. Help us in that endeavor. It's in your name, in your Son's name that we pray. Amen. All right. Thank y'all.